Hello, everyone. I am that Weems guy here for another episode. I believe this will be number 38. Our guest in number 17 was Spencer Keepers, and Spencer is joining us again tonight. How you doing, Spencer?
Good. Glad to be here, Lee.
For a quick refresher, tell everybody who you are.
My name's Spencer Keepers. I'm the founder of Keepers Concealment and kind of known as the appendix guy. We'll talk a little bit about that later because I've spent way more time carrying strong side than I have appendix, but I'm known as the appendix guy. Firearms trainer, etc. Passionate about all things firearms, tactics, all that stuff, the stuff we do. So,
Well, there you go. If you will allow me to take a little short programming moment here, I sent the updated numbers to some previous guests on how their episode was doing this week. And two of the people immediately replied wanting to know how that compared to John Hearn's most recent episode. And of course, both of them beat John. Of note,
that's good.
Yeah, of note, Cecil Birch's episode this last week is ahead of John's pace the last time he was on. And so Cecil just wanted that known and wanted that brought up tonight, especially for John to hear. And we decided.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Cecil has some good tactics because not only can he choke you out, he can do it over the airwaves.
That's right. And we discussed it and we decided it was because John doesn't like Brahms. And so that's why the universe is paying him back.
Wait, John Hearns doesn't like Brahms?
No, he doesn't like Brahms.
That's it. Him and I are done.
Right. And all the audience just disappeared because we brought up ice cream again. But hey, I'm a fat guy. We're going to talk about ice cream.
Right.
All right. Now back to regularly scheduled moment. Now, after all that, you have to beat him this coming week.
Oh, that's easy. It's John Hearn we're talking about.
Right, because if you don't beat him, Hearn will be here for episode number 39 to point out that he beat you.
It just won't happen.
The pressure is on. All right. I know this year you rolled out a new class.
Yes.
Tell us about the class.
Okay. So I was contacted by a group of federal LEOs about doing a concealment class. And so we talked about it, and I kind of drew a class up. I labeled it Concealed Carry for the Modern Law Enforcement Officer because I couldn't think of anything smarter. You know how that is, right? And so went up to Detroit area. It was a mixture of 16 students. That's the max that I'll have in a class. But it was a mixture of different agencies, different levels of tiers of those agencies, but all federally based. Even had a NOAA cop in it, if you can believe that. The only one in Michigan.
Well, there are only 22 of them in the United States. So.
Oh, really? He didn't tell me that. He said that they were a very small agency. Well, and I just kind of let it go at that.
It's the numbers in the 20. I think it's 22, but it's in the 20s.
Wow.
I took an internal affairs class at FLETC with one a while back, and that's what he told me. It may be higher than 22, but it's in the 20s.
Wow.
And for you, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Yes.
Yeah.
He talked about the so much of his stuff is involved in the fisheries department, and he about ruined me on seafood, but I can't let that happen. So anyhow, so this group of guys, their primary, like most of them's primary thing is plainclothes, right? Which I found very interesting because I had a couple of SRT members in there, SRT, yeah, I believe so. and talked to those guys, and they were kind of like the NOAA, it was like 7 of them in like the state of Michigan,
Mhm.
very hard fraternity to get into. He talked about how tough the training was and all that. But, for them, it was kind of one or two things. It was plain clothes or an AR.
Right.
There wasn't a whole lot in between that, And so as I started the class, what became very apparent pretty quick, one, I had to kind of establish why you would want to take a class from me like that. And, those facts, I've been carrying a gun long before it was probably legal, long before I was actually of age. So you can kind of think of right out of high school about 1987-ish,
Mhm.
right? And in doing that for, now so long, I've developed a lot because, especially back in the day, I mean, I devoured every magazine there was, every book that I could get my hands on, and learning all the different carry systems and trying them out. And, have, oh gosh, I bet one time I had a closet full of holsters, not just a few drawers or a few bags, Um, and so the other side of that is, like I said, I did that very, discreetly. And the strong difference between civilian concealed carriers and their, law enforcement counterparts is you guys have a badge. you know, if somebody sees your gun or, your gun prints or,
It's really not a big
whatever,
deal.
it's yeah, that's your everyday, right?
Yeah.
Well, for us, especially the way the laws were early on in Oklahoma, like, I mean, if your gun printed, they could pull and it become an issue, they
Mhm.
could pull your card over that.
Yeah.
So you had to be very diligent about that. And I took that and still do. There's concealment and then there's concealment. And those are two different things, but, using the
Yeah.
same word, obviously. So that's what I was there to give those guys
Yeah.
is all the tips and tricks on like really every concealment position, if you will. Obviously I covered appendix because,
Yeah.
I have to cover that one. And it was very interesting because by the end of the class, everybody tried it. Like they didn't start off that way, but by the end of the class, they were like, "Hey, I want to try that." So, and then of course, strong side, inside the waistband, uh, shoulder, pocket, ankle. Even had a great slide for small of the back. It just simply said, "Don't."
Yeah.
you know, um, and it was really revealing to me, and I'm not sure why I was so surprised about this, but to almost every man, not all of them, but to the vast majority, they all came to me at one point in time in the class privately and was like, I don't know why we never practice from concealment when we're on the range. It's just like they had it in their mind that when they went to the range, they would put their duty gear on and run from their duty gear, even though they spent way more time plain clothes on duty than they do, in duty gear. And I just found that very, very interesting. The other thing that came out, and I was able to, kind of progress with the guys of, starting to really understand the draw stroke, both primarily we were working from appendix or strong side, right? to really start to understand that draw stroke. And they were like, one of them was like, so wait a minute, you mean you can be just as fast from concealment as you can a duty holster? And I'm like, bro, and a lot of times we can be way faster,
Yeah, depending on the duty holster
Right.
and then the method of concealed carry and how you're having to clear the concealment garment. Someone who is just moderately skilled from appendix carry is going to be faster than someone coming out of a level 3 duty holster.
Yeah.
There's just way more going on that you got to do.
Yeah. Every change in direction, every different, movement you have to do with your hand to activate that holster adds probably anywhere from 15 to 2,500s.
Yeah.
And that builds up. That's one reason why appendix will always be easier to be fast from than strong side, inside the waistband.
Yeah.
You just have to move less to get the gun to where it needs to be.
Yeah. I want to touch on something real quick there. You talk about to do all the training from the duty gear versus concealment.
Right.
For a traditional law enforcement agency where everybody starts out in a uniform, there's typically, unless you specifically seek training in a concealed carry method, all the training you're ever going to see is going to be uniform duty carry. And I know when I went from uniform patrol to a detective role, I didn't go through a concealed carry class.
Yeah.
I just started carrying concealed because that agency required us to wear a jacket and tie, unless we were wearing something clearly identifying ourselves like we were in uniform. But when we would go qualify, we'd all just put on our duty
gear.
Yeah. But you can contrast that with, say, like an agency, say like the FBI. Their guys are never in uniform unless they're on a special operations team. So you would think their training would be geared more towards a concealed carry approach.
Yeah. And I wonder if it is.
Yeah.
I really don't know.
We'll get Bruce back on and ask him about that. Bruce Cartwright. So we try to do training for our guys with concealed carry for when they're off duty, but it's not like a mass thing for the agency. It's the guys that want to go out and practice in it, we do it. So that's a topic in law enforcement that really doesn't get addressed because there's only so much training time and only so much training dollars. And if you're struggling just to get people qualified, whatever qualified is, and check those boxes to go, and then we're going to have to go back and do it again. Everything concealed. Now I make the argument that you should qualify in whichever method in which you go on duty. And that's kind of been the standard at the training center and everything. Is like if you're a plainclothes detective, you should qualify course as you would be going on duty. If you're a uniform patrol guy, you should be shooting it as you go on duty.
Well, that makes sense.
And so our rule was always, if you didn't have on your duty gear, you had to have on concealment.
Right.
And so everybody's put on their duty gear because we all worked uniform duty for overtime stuff. But that may be something now you would think that coming from the agencies that you were probably dealing with in this initial class, if they're all agents, they're probably more in the concealed or business casual type thing than a uniform.
Yeah. And that seems to be the case. And, what you brought up, I, posted a little bit about it and got quite a bit of interest from several agencies across the country, and still working on some, which I hope kind of pan out, but they don't know until, after the first of the year and budgets and all the stuff that I'm sure you get to deal with, and, but, several of them have been like, dude, or, I just get a random PM from some guy that, I'm friends with on Facebook, and I really know them. And they're like, man, would love to have you come up and do a class, but we're, like the ammo thing is, that's like, we actually have money to pay you to come teach the class. We just don't have any ammo for them to shoot the class, like, man, what a
Yeah.
quandary to be in.
I saw where one of the vendors just yesterday, I was quoting 12 to 14 month delivery time.
Oh my gosh.
And how do you train? How do you plan a training thing when you don't know? We did our order for ammunition at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is July. We still haven't gotten it all in.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here looking at my calendar, supposed to start my training for this time. And okay, I've got enough to get started and get everybody going. But if that other ammo shipment doesn't come in, back half of the year, may have to readjust. But,
Right.
that is a thing when, say you got an agency, they got to go out and qualify. They would love to do a concealed carry class for their uniform, for their personnel, but do they have the ammo to pull it off?
Yeah.
And then you have the time. Of course, here's another way to look at that too, is when your personnel are off duty, they're going to be carried concealed. So that should be something you should be addressing as well.
You know, depending on the hours that you work, you may spend as much or more time in concealment as you do in duty gear, and that's what these guys were even talking about was, they all carried off duty, but, a few of them was like, man, hey, I hate to admit it, but, I carried a 380 in my left front pocket or something, and I'm like, and they're like, they're like, you're showing me that I can carry a full size gun comfortably and have easy concealment, and they were like, I can change that, and so I was pretty happy about that. But that's how a lot of the guys, that's just, kind of check that box. Yeah, I've got a gun. But, I always talk about, my theory on concealed carry is high performance. I don't want to just ever just check the box of that I have a gun. I want to know that I can do things with that gun that put me, in the like top tier. I want to be able to shoot 100 on the FBI qual and 100 on the test, and or come close to it. Those are the kind of things that I'm trying to achieve from concealment, not just I have a gun and it's
right.
And I go ahead.
Yeah, there is a difference between, and when you kind of touched on it earlier, concealment, and I guess covert may be a better word.
Right.
If I want to run down to the grocery store, my main goal in being concealed is that people don't recognize me as a cop and ask me about traffic tickets while I'm going to get groceries and everything. And if anybody happens to notice my gun, it's not a big deal. I will not get in any legal trouble for it. I will not really have any administrative trouble for that, because it's just, he's a deputy. It's okay.
Yeah.
But I contrast that in a few months ago, I went to a place in which I was legal to carry, but there was a high potential for headache should have been discovered that I was carrying.
Right.
And that changed the ball game quite a bit in making sure that I was carrying in a manner in which I was least likely to be discovered.
Right.
And, that changes that. Well, the obvious answer is go smaller gun, go J-frame. But, but then that cuts into the performance window.
Correct.
I'm not going to be able to run that gun to the same efficiency that I could run a Glock 19. And I've got, one serving of 5 rounds versus 3 servings of 5 rounds that I would have with my Glock 19.
Yeah.
And so the advantages of being able to conceal the 19 or a 19 size gun, that could be the 320 compact, or it could be a M&P or whatever.
Right.
The advantages of being able to conceal that type of gun is there is a bonus on the backside of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were mentioning a high performance concealed carry. It's going to be hard to get high performance concealed carry with a J frame or an LCP or something in that category.
Right. And that's the, that's kind of one of the things I harp on in my classes a bunch, and probably don't do it social media enough justice on it. But, it's, there's such a huge difference in the level of comfort that you have as well, or at least I do, because like when I go to Walmart, maybe I've only got, maybe I didn't even take a spare mag, but I've got 18 rounds of 9mm on a gun that I can shoot literally 2-inch groups at 25 yards on demand with, or I can draw sub-second from the holster and start getting hits on a target that's, relatively close. And there's just a lot of confidence that comes with that. It's kind of like, I've never been one, but when I was training jujitsu, there was a huge level of confidence that I had that came from that. If I had to, deal with somebody on the street and actually get in a tussle, where that's completely different now. It's like I don't have any business being in one. I'm going to do everything I can to avoid it. And that's kind of that may not be a good analogy, but it's kind of the analogy difference between carrying a J frame and carrying a Glock 19 and the ability to use them,
Yeah. Now our good friends Daryl Bolke, Cecil Birch, and several of the other guys that we would know and that our audience would know did an episode for another podcast, Primary and Secondary. We were talking about defining the mission, and they made an argument for carrying something like a J frame, and it has its place.
It does.
It's got its place, and maybe there's a different mentality that go, or not a different mentality, but a different mindset that you have to go, because you do have to recognize those limitations.
Right. And for me on the J frame, I don't know how many people actually know this story. It's not that I'm not a J fan, because I own some, but I was involved in a little scenario where I had just had a right knee scope and a right shoulder scope a week apart. And a couple of days after the second surgery, I did something as simple as walking out to the mailbox to get the mail. And around the corner came an old dilapidated Chevrolet pickup with 2 males in the front and 3 males in the back. And then, of course, you could see I was all bandaged up. It was early in the year. It was cold out. I had a vest on. And in the left front pocket of that vest, I had a Smith & Wesson, one of their like 340 PDs or whatever, one of the better J's, with 5 shots of 38 special plus P something or another. They pulled up to a stop right in front of me. There was some discussion that went on real quick through the driver to the guys in the back. The guys in the back all moved to my side of the vehicle, and it was quite obvious what was fixing to go down. I was just waiting on it, looking at the driver because he was the one in charge.
You're waiting for the beep.
And it became really apparent that I had 1 round for each bad guy.
Yeah.
And, I know there's a lot of love for the J frame, but the next day when I went to get the mail, I had a Glock and 16 rounds of 9mm. And I just invite you to be in that position and then start talking about how awesome the J frames are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I got a lot of love for the wheel gun. I'm doing a Model 10 project right now.
nice.
Yeah. My preference, if you lay out on a table a bunch of custom 1911s, that kind of stuff, and then an old K-frame, while everybody else is oogling and eyeing over the 1911 or whatever, I'm going to be over looking at the K-frame.
Yeah.
That's my personal preference. Right. It's not my personal, I'm going out into the world and I need to defend myself preference.
Yeah.
but as far as just what I think a gun is and what I want to look at and appreciate, that's just where I go. Now you're teaching this class concealed carry to law enforcement, but you've never been a cop.
Correct.
So did that become an issue at any point in time in the class?
It did not. In fact, as the class went on, like I'm sure there was a little bit of it that probably went very, unspoken
Mm-hmm.
when we first started. But it quickly got dispersed. If it was a deal at all, it didn't come up. Like there was never a statement of from a student like, well, you're not a cop, so you don't know, or
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. That never really did come up because it was really at that point in time, it was all about the mechanics of how you clear the cover garment, how you get consistent with accuracy, and all that stuff. And I've got great feedback from the guys where they've adopted a lot of my teaching methodologies in their training now with, because some of them are full-time firearms trainers,
Right.
and they're actually teaching what I taught them,
Yeah.
which is pretty gratifying.
Yeah. And there's technical skill and then there's application. And, you and I did, that was episode 17 was why can't technical and application get
Right.
along? All right. But we can also look at the application side of that. Once the decision has been made to apply, there's really
Right.
not much different. Now, there may be some different legal standards as far as, constitutional standards versus criminal law standards that would apply in the cop versus the non-cop. All right. But you weren't teaching a class on building clearing or
Right.
how to
No,
take down a suspect. This is all
no.
about how to carry the gun concealed and to deploy the gun if needed.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where my path is. That's my lane, and I stayed well within it. You know, and I was like, here's some of the stuff that we're going to shoot, guys. I mean, we shot the test, we shot the super test, we shot. Oh gosh, my keeper's test 3 to a 3x5 card at 7 yards from concealment. My version of the 3-2-1 drill test, etc. And so it was pretty quick. The Rangemaster core handgun skill test, we shot that, so it became pretty evident very quickly, based on the scores that these guys had a lot to learn, and they saw mine and it was like, okay, this dude's not just talking, he can actually put down what he's talking about. And I think that had a whole lot to do with it.
What was the most common type of gear they came with?
A striker fired handgun. Almost all were Glocks. And average gear at best.
Like what kind of holsters were prevalent?
It was like outside the waistband, strong side stuff that they had, just like throw a shirt over or something like that. In some ways, and that changed pretty quick, but in some ways, kind of inappropriate sized guns. There were some 42s and 43, I think, and then that kind of went away real quick when they saw the volume of fire and what we were actually going to be doing. They put bigger guns on, but just kind of average stuff. A few of them had actually gone out and bought some holsters, and several of them had bought some appendix holsters because they wanted to kind of go down that road, and they kind of figured that learning from me at that point in time be the best way to do that. And but all the gun stuff was like on point, if not like maybe even a little overkill, tricked out, which kind of surprised me. But the holster selection was, average at best.
I was wondering
So
if that's what your experience would be, because what I find um, with the guys that I see that will carry off duty is they tend to go out and buy not optimal gear
yeah,
because
yeah,
they just don't know. Because their duty gear is provided for them,
right,
and then they go into a store and go, okay, that one's $40, that one's 75. I'll get this one, and they
yeah.
don't put a lot of thought and research into that,
Well,
and so
and
that's just one. And belts, the quality of the belt's a big issue.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that I was really able to give them was, part of the class is a couple-hour lecture of going over holsters and belts and examples of those. Take a big bag full of all that stuff and lay it out on the table and talk about the subtleties from one to the other. Because
Mhm.
they look at it and it's a holster. I look at it and it's a piece of art that needs
Right.
descriptive terms between one versus the other. You know,
Yeah.
and so that was one of the things that they just ate that up. They were just like, and some of the guys literally left the first evening and went to the stores, come back with new stuff the next day. It was pretty funny.
Yeah,
So
it's one of those things that you almost have to prove it to them that the
yeah,
belt does make a difference.
yeah, yeah,
The quality of the holster does make a difference, and the quality is not necessarily a dollar amount thing. It's more of a design
right,
thing,
right.
and it's how many pancake style Kydex holster makers are there out there right now?
There's one in every neighborhood.
Right. And you compare that to something, say, like Tenacors, like that very first holster they came out with. I know they've gone to the AIWB stuff, but like that very first pancake holster they came out with, there's no comparison between the strength of the holster, what they put out, and what your buddy makes that's attached with screws.
Yeah,
There's absolutely no comparison between the strength of that.
yeah,
And then, I guess I'm sure you see this because you do the appendix thing. That's your deal. Every holster maker all of a sudden does something and they call it an appendix carry holster.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And the vast majority of them don't have a clue what it takes to make a high performance appendix holster,
right.
and that's kind of going back to that theme, it just, don't get me wrong, they're carrying a gun,
Yeah.
God love them, but it's just like it with just a little bit more, it could be so much more,
Right.
and, that's,
All
and
right.
there's a huge difference. And I guess I'm a horrible businessman because I've always put the performance of the holster uh, and its potential above profits.
Yeah.
You know, and hence that's why I drive a 2013 Raptor and not a 2022 Raptor.
I drive a 1999 S10, Spencer.
Well, and right now I don't even drive the Raptor because it's sitting at my nephew's with the new engine we're putting in it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. What, from your perception or from the feedback of the students in the class, what was their biggest takeaway?
I honestly think their biggest takeaway was that you could carry a full size fighting gun. So we're talking, Glock 19 ish, or maybe a high capacity carry gun, however you would want to term that, up to a full size gun,
Mhm.
comfortably and easily concealable, and have really good skill with it from concealment. Like that just kind of blew all of them away because I think, like you talked about, they've all come up from, because I'm sure all of them didn't just start at this agency and walk straight into the jobs they have,
Uh,
they started out, in uniform with duty gear, and that's what they trained with, and that's kind of, that just kind of stuck.
Right.
Yeah. So that seemed to be the biggest like overall takeaway and feedback that I got from them.
All right. Now, for you as an instructor that has primarily taught open classes and more private citizens, what was your biggest takeaway from teaching a 100% cop class?
Um, you know, it, there wasn't a whole lot of difference in them, and maybe I just got lucky, right? Because I've been in classes where there have been guys that have been directed to have been there
Mhm.
in law enforcement. And, the first thing they wanted to know was when was lunch and can I leave early?
Yeah.
And so maybe I got a little lucky there because I really didn't have that guy in the class. They
Okay.
all wanted to be there and they all wanted to learn.
Yeah.
So I felt pretty fortunate on that side.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that I noticed is that I can tell a difference between when I'm working with pre-academy cadets versus post-academy people, is that the people that have been through the academy, they know how to go stand on a shooting line
Right.
and not to bend over and pick things up and not to walk off the line and everything. That's the biggest difference I see from a 100% cop class versus an open enrollment or people who haven't been through the academy or something yet, because they have not had the world unfold its wrath on them for doing something that they shouldn't do yet.
Gotcha.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Man, honestly, the guys were great.
yeah.
Shag targets for me. They saw how much material we were trying to cover, and
Mhm.
and then they just clicked right in and started. A couple of them that I think are like kind of up and coming firearms trainers for the agency.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those guys were just like, "What do you need? Let me do it."
That's another difference, is that when you're teaching a bunch of cops, they become a workforce for you versus private citizens.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, they
yeah.
do. They will do that because they're used to it from, from the training. So somebody gets out there and tells them to go do stuff and they just go do it.
But I tend to, and I don't know, maybe if it's just me or I just get lucky because
Yeah.
luck in the keeper's household don't go together whatsoever, or I wouldn't be putting a new engine in my Raptor.
Right.
Like even in my open enrollment classes,
Hmm.
I always have at least
Yeah.
a few guys that, are just like, let
Hmm.
us do this so you can think about, what we need to do next,
Right.
kind
Yeah.
of.
Um, anything else you want to throw out about this class we've been talking about?
Uh, man, I'd love to do it again.
All right.
Love to do it again. So hopefully we'll get some more takers on that.
There you go. Well, let's shift gear a little bit.
All right.
I know you were really heavily running, really into the Beretta 92s, the Langdon Technology guns, and the DASA trigger,
Right.
and then you decided to go the dot route and you went to a Glock, if I remember correctly.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Um, and I understand that now you've kind of moved into a 1911 platform with the dot. Is that correct?
Yep. Starting to play with that. Um, and I have, so it's kind of one of those things that, you know, there's a lot of firearms instructors out there. And the only thing they've taught is Glock.
Uh-huh.
That's like they really don't know. And that's not really what I want to be. I want to be, and not just a little bit, but very in depth, So that's part of one of the reasons I spent so much time with the DASA guns here recently. But I spent a ton of times, obviously, with striker fire guns,
Right.
and I have carried a 1911. It's been in the past. It's been now quite a long time ago, And I want to now kind of go through that. Um, so definitely looking at the staccato, because as much, it's kind of like I told something to my nephew the other day. We were texting back and forth from working on the engine, and we had wrapped it all up in plastic, but the oil pan wasn't on the bottom. And I finally sent him a text, and I was like, "Man, we should have put that oil pan on." He was like, "Well, I don't think there's going to be a lot of dust with that." And I said, I keep telling myself that, but myself keeps telling me I'm wrong. Right. So that's kind of where I'm going with the 10 round 1911 and
Mhm.
the 18 round 1911, and so I kept telling myself, man, just get you a single stack and carry that 9mm 10 rounds, you're good to go. And self never got around to that, but when they got the staccato, so
All right, so
uh,
you've got three distinct different trigger systems that you've worked with there.
correct.
And I know you were Glock before you went down the DASA path. You were shooting a Glock 35 when I met you. Um, what differences in finesse and technique do you see amongst the three trigger systems?
Oh, well, kind of like right off. The striker fired trigger systems are probably the easiest to teach and learn, right?
Mhm.
The DASA guns can be, but even I will admit that you have to put in quite a bit more work to be equally as proficient. So if I gave you, a Glock 17 and a good Beretta 92, let's say, and 1,000 rounds of ammo, and a 16-hour, or 2 10-hour days at the range or whatever, I would expect you to be farther along in the skill set by a bit with the 17 versus the DASA gun.
And why is that?
It just takes longer to learn. You've got two trigger pulls you have to master and to shoot them fast and accurately, and they can be shot fast and accurately. You have to learn how to do that, at the speed that fast and accurate happens at, right? And that's a hard transition to do. It just really is.
And then you have the whole thing of decocking the gun.
And it bumfuggles me to this day that that's an issue. And maybe it's just the difference in the way I teach it and the way I think about it and all that. But that literally becomes part of retracting the gun, right? But I've seen it. I've taught DASA only classes, and even in that class, it's like decock your guns. Come up to a dude, and he's got the gun in the holster already, and I'm like, just don't move. No, just don't. Whatever you do, don't move. But they're now moving into the single action. It's kind of the same thing because you've got a safety you have to manipulate.
Uh-huh.
So the I think you can kind of make an argument for both of them there, because like if we're not decocking the gun yet we're carrying a single action and not putting the safety on, we're now in the same.
Right.
We have both those have roughly a 4.5 pound trigger pull,
Right.
and they're almost equal at that point in time as far as amount of travel, et cetera. But the the only flip side of that is on a typical single action gun, you have the grip safety that does give you a little bit more margin in that scenario than a DASA gun.
Well, that's if you're running a 1911 pattern. If you're running like a SIG SAO, or you manage to
Right.
get your hands on one of these Springfield high powers, you're not
Right.
going to have that.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Yeah.
Uh,
That's a very true point.
yeah.
But there is something to the allure. I was talking to David Cagle actually a while back about, because I know he's running a staccato now,
Mhm.
and we talked a little bit about it. And kind of one of my questions to him was, as a cop, do you have any hesitations to carrying that trigger system, right? And he was like, man, I shoot it. It's so much easier to shoot, and I shoot it so much better. Why shouldn't I carry it? And I'm like, bro, if that's the path you're going to go down, I get it. But then again, I've watched, I've seen video of an officer ending with a Beretta 92 in double action mode into the concrete while keeping a gun on a suspect. So, while in my mind, I've heard way too many cop stories that revolved around, I had this dude at gunpoint, the hammer was coming back. Man, if that had been a 1911 or a striker fired that gun, that dude would be dead.
Yeah.
To not think that there's probably some benefit to people management trigger in the DASA guns. But that's not where law enforcement's at. Not at all.
I mentioned my love for the revolver earlier. And one of the reasons I like revolvers so much is when you touch the trigger, it's under full tension. And there's no take up, there's no pre-travel. When you touch the trigger, it's under the full tension, and then you apply that same amount of pressure all the way through the trigger pull until the hammer trips and the gun fires.
Right.
Versus whereas like a Glock, a CZP-10, somewhere along the MMP, you have all this slack that you have to take up before you hit the wall.
Right.
And and it's like slack, resistance, break versus tension, break.
Right.
And to me, there's an advantage of having the tension on the trigger as soon as your finger comes into contact with it. And so you can get that with the DASA guns, and that's what I trained on initially. Was a Smith 4006, and I loved it. I learned how to shoot on that, and that may be the reason I like revolvers so much to this day is the similarities in those triggers. And it was hard for me to learn going to the Glock necessarily the finesse of working that trigger. And it's what little I have played with 1911s in my career. That has always been a stumbling block for me with going with the SA gun.
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure if I went and dedicated time to it, it would come down. But I don't like grip safeties.
Right.
And so something more along the lines of, say, a SIG SAO would be more to my preference than, say, the 1911 style gun. But I've seen the staccatos. I've had a chance to play with it with one on the range here recently, and I'm impressed. Now I know funny thing with David Cagle talking about carrying it on duty, and some of his brethren have followed suit with their agency. They had to put out a public statement.
I saw that
About it was okay for the hammers to be cocked on the guns. That's how
yes, I saw that. And like I actually saw that. I didn't see that from David. Like I actually saw that from his agency's Facebook.
Yeah.
Right. I thought that I just died laughing. I thought that was so funny.
And then I know that public relations statement that they put out led to people calling the agency that were appalled that the officers were walking around in the chamber.
Ha! That I didn't know about.
Yeah, and so it's just the whole mentality of it, where it's just okay. Basically, a Glock's cocked already. You just don't see it.
Yeah.
Or it's partially
Or
cocked.
you want to talk about one 320?
Yeah.
Like 100%, you know.
Yeah, they're partially cocked, but you can't see it because it's the internal striker design, and there's no external hammer for anybody to see, and people don't bat an eye at that.
Yeah, no.
What do you see in performance-wise from your Staccato compared to, say, the Glock that you were shooting?
Oh, so the Glocks that I've been shooting, I've been running a KKM barrel and comp on.
Mhm.
So it's a Glock 17 with the KKM barrel and the big comp,
Right.
because that's something else that I've never spent time on. So I thought it was time. Those things are extremely accurate.
Yeah.
Like I have no BS 2-inch groups at 25 yards, not with good ammo, not uncommon. If I do my part, and the dot makes that easier, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing that level of performance, but like the I've shot a number of hundreds on the test, like back to back to back, and I can't say that I've ever done that with another platform. So,
Is that with the Glock or with the Staccato?
the Staccato.
Okay.
The Staccato. Yeah.
All right. What do you see in reliability-wise from the Staccato?
Literally so far, as long as I'm using, because when I got acquired the gun used, as long as I'm using the correct mags, I've not had any issue with it.
Okay. What do you mean by correct mags?
When I got it, the dude said there was 2 different colors. There was black and like chrome looking, and I guess the chrome ones were Gen 1 mags. From what little bit I've researched this, the black ones are like Gen 2s, and he said the black ones had to run 100% for him, and I'm seeing the same results.
Okay.
So,
right.
And now, I think he said he had about 2,300 rounds on the gun when I got it, and he said after he figured the mag issue out, it had ran 100% since then. So,
all right. Well, all right. We just went down this little brief discussion of trigger systems. Going back to the cop class that you taught, and I was asking about the differences. Everybody showed up with a striker fire gun.
Yes. Yep. 100%.
Almost everybody was equipped identically. Pretty much.
Yeah.
Maybe a little variances. Compare that to the open enrollment world, and what do you see?
Still vastly, strikers outnumber anything else by a bit.
Right.
Then, occasionally I'll see some DASA guns, but this last year has been more staccatos, more 1911s, and then more strikers, where probably a few years ago, the 1911s, staccatos, and DAs were switched.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a little bit more more 1911-ish, but specifically the staccatos.
Yeah, I think in the private citizen classes, you tend to see, while striker fire still is predominant, you do see more of a variation of the other systems coming in. But then when you get into the striker fire world, you see more of a tend towards like smaller stuff is becoming more popular, like the SIG 365 and the Glock 48 and the 43X and stuff.
Yeah.
And so from a teaching perspective, is I got this guy over here that's running an 8 to 12 round mag, and I got this guy down here that's running an 18 round mag with a +2 extension on it. That can become that can
Yeah.
become some of an issue there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It-
So
the thing that kind of gets me, especially about the guys are bringing like the 365s and stuff like that, um, it that little gun always surprises me. And now the new Shield Plus, like that gun surprises me a lot too.
I haven't seen one of those yet, and I know I do get feedback from the audiences. We love that the show tends to stay away from gear discussions and goes more into the teaching and the historical context. But I do want to point out we are kind of trying to touch on some of the different things that you see from the different worlds and the challenges of adjusting as an instructor to this. So what were you saying about a 365?
So I hate to do this.
Yeah.
My phone is just getting blown up, and I'm getting it's an emergency text messages.
Okay.
It's from my nephew's girlfriend, so that concerns me a little bit. So let's. I'm so very sorry, but let's wrap this up real quick.
Sure.
And let me deal with whatever's going on, because if it's something my nephew, I'm leaving.
Yeah, I understand completely. So as you're leaving, what are you carrying that staccato in?
You will know soon enough.
All right, go take care of your family business, Spencer, and thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us, and to the audience, thank you for your time.
Thanks, guys.